Today's talk is brought to you by GP Synergy. GP Synergy is the sole provider of the federally funded Australian General Practice Training Program, the AGPT. That's the program for doctors seeking to specialise as general practitioners, GPs, in New South Wales and ACT. And remember that general practice is a specialty in Australia. So, it's great to have Dr. Graham Lee with us today. Graham has been a medical educator with GP Synergy since 2010. Graham and I go way back. He was formerly the Director of Pre-Vocational Education and Training until the PGPP program concluded in 2014, and that's where I met Graham at Hetty when I was working there. Graham has previously worked as a GP at the Aboriginal Medical Service in Redfern, as well as looking after patients who have recently been released from the prison system through Justice Health's Care Navigation Support Program. He currently works as a GP in travel medicine and has a long-standing interest in education and has continued involvement with undergraduate teaching through the University of New South Wales, as well as educating in music as a qualified music teacher. And it's really good to have Graham give this talk specifically about GP training options for IMG doctors, because it's a question that I get asked a lot of. Well, it's a topic I get asked a lot of questions about, and I personally find this even more complex than the other specialty training pathways, because there are, I think it's true, there are a lot more options and pathways to kind of be aware of. So welcome, Graham, and we're delighted to hear you talk.
Good morning, Anthony, and thank you for your welcome. And yes, my name is Graham, and I'm currently the Deputy Director of Training at GP Synergy. And also a GP working travel medicine, as Anthony introduced. So I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of country, wherever you may be meeting. We pay our respects to them, their cultures and their elders, both past and present. So you might be wondering, who is GP Synergy? Well, GP Synergy is the training organisation for the Australian General Practice Training Program, AGPT, in New South Wales and the ACT. And doctors who are training with GP Synergy are working towards fellowship of either the Australian College of Rural and Remote Medicine, ACRM, or fellowship of the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners, RACGP. So why might you consider a career in general practice? Well, the first thing I would say is I really enjoy general practice because of the great medicine. There is a wide variety of clinical presentations, and I get to practice medicine in a variety of different settings as well. GPs are often at the forefront of the primary healthcare system. And we do make a valuable contribution to our communities, our patients, and their families through the care we provide. As a GP, I can practice in a wide range of clinical experiences, and you never quite know what walks through the door next, and that can be exciting and stimulating. And I'm able to explore interest in different clinical areas without necessarily being locked in to that discipline for the rest of my career. General practice also affords a bit of flexibility with your career. You have some choice over how much you work, where you work, the hours of work, the type of practices you work in, and general practice is often a career that gives us a lot of flexibility around balancing work and life. And for many GPs, that is a real benefit of general practice. Rural GP can be particularly rewarding and is something that we would definitely recommend you considering. There is a great need for general practitioners in rural settings. And as a rural GP, you have a great opportunity to be very much involved in your communities and the families. Rural communities often welcome you with open arms as a rural GP. And as a rural GP, you're also able to have better opportunities to participate in the full breadth of general practice, not only the in-practice uh, uh, things we do as GPs, but also out of practice, including working in local hospitals as a GP, visiting medical officer, for example, and also other out of general practice activities like residential aged care facilities, home visits, and really providing a comprehensive service to rural communities in which you live. What general practice also offers is a pathway towards rural generalism. And rural generalists are doctors who are providing both comprehensive general practice and also other emergency or other procedural type care in hospital and community settings as part of a rural healthcare team. So as a rural generalist, a GP might, for example, be a GP obstetrician or a GP anaesthetist. And you can imagine that these are really important services which are really valued by the communities in which you live and work in. So how do you become a GP? The most common pathway to becoming a GP in Australia is through the Australian General Practice Training Program, AGPT. And AGPT is the main pathway I'm here to talk about today, but it is not the only pathway to general practice. I will touch on these towards the end of my presentation, but other pathways include the practice experience pathway through the RACGP, the independent pathway through ACRM, or the remote vocational training scheme. You really do need to consider your own personal circumstances as to which pathway to choose. And I'm hoping that today, by telling you more about AGPT, that will better help you decide whether this pathway could be right for you. So AGPT is a federally funded training program. The Commonwealth's Department of Health, working with both GP colleges, ACRM and RACGP, and in turn working with the regional training organisations. Together, these organisations run and deliver the Australian General Practice Training Program. AGPT is training in community and hospital settings. In your community GP terms, there is dedicated on-site supervision, as well as protected in-practice teaching time. As a fully funded training program, you also get paid out-of-practice education with your regional training organisation. And it is a very well-supported training program where you get personalised mentoring and monitoring by a GP medical educator. AGPT also provides a high level of fellowship assessment support, and we do run a whole suite of exam preparation courses for our registrars. And like I've mentioned already, AGPT is a program that is fully funded by the Commonwealth Government. One of the complex things about general practice training in Australia is that there are two GP colleges. Like many other specialties where there's only one specialty college, there are two GP colleges. That can be confusing, but it also means you have choice. You can choose to work towards fellowship of either ACRM or RACGP, or some registrars choose to do both. So what does fellowship training with the GP colleges look like? For fellowship of ACRM, this is a rural pathway training program only. Typically, it is a 4-year training program, of which you do 36 months of what is called core general training, and that includes community GP placements, as well as 12 months of advanced specialized training, often in an area of procedural medicine, for example, obstetrics and gynecology, anesthetics, or it could be things like emergency medicine, Aboriginal health, and other specialized training as well. For ACRM, depending on your prior medical work experience and learning you've completed to date, you may be able to apply for recognition of prior learning, or RPL, for up to 24 months. Training towards fellowship of ACRM also includes some mandatory hospital rotations, which are required during training, and I will talk a bit more about these in a subsequent slide. And as part of this fellowship pathway, you also need to spend at least 12 months in a more rural setting. So modified Monash areas 4 to 7. In comparison, fellowship of RACGP, this can be either general pathway or rural pathway. It is a minimum 3-year training program. So ACRM is 4 years, RACGP is 3 years. And the 3 years typically comprise of 12 months of suitable hospital rotation, at least 18 months of community GP terms, and 6 months of extended skills, which is often done in a community GP setting or perhaps in a hospital setting. There is an optional 4th year for Fellowship of Rural Generalism, and RPL is also available, though it is for a maximum of 12 months. For training towards Fellowship of RACGP, there are some mandatory hospital terms which must be completed before you start your first community GP. I've mentioned a couple of times now that rural generalism is can be a part of GP training. So how do you become a rural generalist in New South Wales? Well, firstly, you need to be training towards either FRACGP or FACRM. You need to apply for rural generalist posts, either prior to being accepted onto the AGPT program or when you've joined AGPT. And if you're interested in becoming a rural generalist, I would strongly recommend you contact HETI to consider joining the HETI Foundation Year programs. And in terms of getting rural generalist training posts, you would apply for that through HETI's annual JMO recruitment. So what does GP training look like if you're doing ACRM training or RACGP training with GP Synergy? One of the key features of the AGPT pathway is that you do both hospital and community general practice placements. For your hospital experience, it is your responsibility to find and apply to suitably accredited hospital rotations. For RACGP, there are some rotations you must have completed before you undertake your first community GP term. And these include general medicine, surgery, and emergency. And often, registrars may have already completed these during the internship training. There's also a mandatory pediatric requirement, and you need to complete at least 12 months of hospital rotations prior to starting your first GP term. And when I say minimum 12 months, that is post-internship, so postgraduate year 2 and above. There are alternatives that may apply if you haven't got a standalone pediatric term, and the full details of those are available on both GP Synergy's website and also the RACGP website. For ACRM, there are also some mandatory hospital disciplines that you must complete, but some of these may be completed after you started your first community GP term. And for ACRM training, in addition to general medicine, surgery, and emergency and pediatrics, there's also mandatory requirements to have necessary experience in obstetrics and anesthetics. And again, just like RACGP, for pediatrics, obstetrics, anesthetics, there are alternate ways to meet these mandatory requirements if you don't have a standalone terms in these disciplines. And again, for further details, those are available through GP Synergy or through ACRM's website. Of course, a big core component of general practice training is actually doing community GP terms and training in GP practices. And GP terms are usually managed through your regional training organization like GP Synergy. There is a wide range of general practices that you may be able to train in. Some may be solo GP clinics, or you could end up working in a larger group practice where there are multiple GPs working as well. As I mentioned earlier, one of the key features of AGPT is that it is a very well supervised and supported training environment. You do get a dedicated an assigned accredited GP supervisor support you whilst you're working in a general practice setting. There are mandatory expectations around supervision and teaching. And our registrars often comment how, as a GP registrar, they really enjoy the work they do because as a GP and seeing patients, although, you know, general practice, like many other disciplines, there is an administrative component that we need to do. One of the exciting things about general practice and general practice training, particularly if you've recently come from the hospital system, is you are really getting involved in clinical decision making and clinical reasoning and making decisions about the care of your patients. But you're not doing that alone. You're doing that with support from an experienced GP supervisor, and that helps you develop your clinical skills, but also really help you prepare for the fellowship assessments. General practice training is not just the training you might receive during in-practice time, but also the full breadth of general practice includes out-of-practice activities as well. And we do encourage our registrars to take part in the full breadth of general practice, and that includes work in residential aged care facilities, home visits, and where possible, participating in out-of-practice hospital visiting medical officer work. And the opportunities for out-of-practice training opportunities are so much greater in rural and remote New South Wales. Out-of-practice training may also include other special skills training, whether it's extended skills or rural general skills training. A part of GP training is also being able to have the opportunity, depending on the pathway you choose, for example, to undertake additional skills training in a hospital setting like anesthetics, O&G, emergency medicine as part of the training terms you're undertaking. Recognition of prior learning is an option in GP training. Applying for recognition of prior learning is optional, but if it is approved, you may be able to reduce your total training time. For ACRM, you may be able to reduce your training time by up to 24 months. For RACGP, by up to 12 months. And for ACRM, recognition of prior learning may apply to hospital training terms and other settings. For RACGP, recognition of prior learning is typically for hospital training terms only. Where can you train? Well, this depends on what training pathway under AGPT you're eligible for and which training region you are selected into. So in addition to the choice of 2 colleges, there's also general pathway and rural pathway. For general pathway, this means that for your community GP terms, you may be able to complete those in urban settings. As a general pathway registrar, you also have the option of training in rural locations, and depending on the training and location obligations you're training in, you will also undertake some training in outer metro regions as well. For rural pathway registrars, you must complete your community GP terms in a rural location. Because AGPT is a federally funded program, the Commonwealth has divided Australia up into 11 training regions nationally. And as you can see on the map here, in some states, there is only 1 training region, like Western Australia or Northern Territory. In New South Wales, there are 3 training regions, and these are training regions defined by the Department of Health: Western New South Wales, Northeastern New South Wales, and Lower Eastern New South Wales. There are 11 training regions nationally. And for the 3 training regions in New South Wales and the ACT, all 3 are managed by GP Synergy. For GP Synergy, we further subdivide each of our training regions into GP Synergy sub-regions. And you'll see on the map here, our sub-regions for Western New South Wales are GP Synergy Western New South Wales, Murrumbidgee and the ACT. For Northeastern New South Wales, we further subdivided that into New England Northwest, our North Coast sub-region, Hunter Manning and Central Coast, Nepean Western and Northern Sydney. And for Lower Eastern New South Wales, that is further subdivided into Central Eastern and Southwestern Sydney and Southeastern New South Wales. What does this mean? This means that if you are applying for the AGPT pathway, and if you're thinking of training in New South Wales and the ACT with GP Synergy, during the selection process, not only would you be asked to nominate which Commonwealth-defined regional training boundary you wish to train in, but as part of the selection process, you'll be selected into one of GP Synergy's sub-regions. And the expectation is you'll be completing the majority of your GP training, and in particular the community GP terms, in the sub-region you've been selected into. There are some sub-regions which are exclusively general pathway only. For example, Nepean Western and Northern Sydney and Central Eastern and Southwestern Sydney. These are metropolitan urban training sub-regions only. If you are a GP registrar on the rural pathway, you will need to be selected into a sub-region where you're able to complete your rural GP training. So how do you apply? Well, firstly, you need to consider which college pathway you like to train towards. And annually, the applications usually open in March. The GP colleges are primarily responsible for the selection process, and you apply directly to the colleges via their websites. For 2021 intake, currently second intake applications will be opening later this month. For RACGP, the window for second intake is from the 31st of August to 21st of September. And for ACRM, second intakes are opening between August 10 and August 31st. During the application process, you'll be asked to nominate which training regions you hope to train in. There are interviews, and if you're successful with the selection process, then you'll be receiving an offer for the training year that you're applying for. So here's a bit of a diagram explaining the steps for ACRM and RACGP for GP selection. For ACRM, you apply to the website. There's paperwork to complete, and there is an application fee. If you pass that first step, you might be offered an interview, and an interview is done jointly between ACRM and the regional training organisation you're applying for. And if that happens to be New South Wales and the ACT, they'll be with GP Synergy. And if you pass that, you'll get a training offer for 2021. For RACGP, there's similarly multiple steps. There's an application process. There's an application fee. There is also a multiple choice exam you need to sit. If you pass that step, then there's also mini interviews with your regional training organisation you're shortlisted to. And again, for New South Wales and ACT, there'll be GP Synergy. And if you pass that, then you'll receive a training offer. So a common question we often get asked is, am I eligible for the Commonwealth-funded AGPT pathway? And even if I'm eligible, am I eligible for the general pathway or rural pathway only? To answer that, both colleges publish a a flow chart to help you work through your individual circumstances as to whether or not you're eligible for the AGPT pathway. There are citizenship considerations, and there's also considerations about where you obtained your primary medical qualification. So on the screen here is the flow chart that I've taken from the ACRM applicant pack. And on the following slide is a similar flow chart you'll find in the RACGP applicant guide. So if you follow those flow charts, that should be able to tell you whether or not you're eligible to apply to the AGPT pathway. Here's a little bit more information about eligibility for AGPT. If you follow the flow charts, you'll notice that there's information about different visa classes and things like that. And currently, at this point in time, GP Synergy is only accepting Group 2 visa applicants, and that is those in subclass 820. However, if you're thinking of applying to GP training in 2021 for the 2022 intake, please come back and check with us if you're in a different visa subclass, as this is a changing space. If you're eligible for AGPT, the next question then is, can you apply to the general pathway, or can you only apply to the rural pathway? And as a general rule of thumb, if you are under the 19AB 10-year moratorium, you are likely to be restricted to the rural pathway only. 19AB moratorium often applies to doctors who are international medical graduates or overseas trained, or foreign graduates of an accredited medical school. And under the 19AB section of the Health Act, doctors in this moratorium are restricted to only work in priority areas of need, that is rural, for a minimum 10-year under Medicare arrangements. Because of that, all potential GP registrars who are subject to the 10-year moratorium, you'll find that you'll only be able to apply to the rural pathway only. AGPT is a well-supported and fully funded general practice training pathway, but it is not the only pathway to general practice in Australia. Both colleges run an alternate pathway. For ACRM, that is the independent pathway, and that is fully managed by ACRM. There are fees that apply, and that is because it is not a fully funded Commonwealth program. Similarly, RACGP has a practice experience program that is managed by the RACGP. And if you would like more information about either of those programs, please have a look at the ACRM and RACGP website. There is also a smaller program that is funded by the Commonwealth. That's called the Remote Vocational Training Scheme. These are typically for doctors already working as GPs in remote locations or rural Aboriginal medical services, and is a training program that has an intake of about 25 applicants per year. If that might apply to you, then please contact RBTS for further information. So for more information about GP training, please do contact GP Synergy. You can request an applicant pack. And if you send us an email to applicant@gpsynergy.com.au, you're more than welcome to join our mailing list and get regular updates about GP training applications, and the latest information. For more information about the specific fellowship pathways and the requirements for fellowship of ACRM and RACGP, the ACRM and RSGP contact details are listed on the slides as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Graham. Very comprehensive there. So we are doing this as a recorded talk, so there may be questions that you want to put on the discussion page, and if there are, we'll make sure they get sent through to GP Synergy for answers, or you might want to directly contact them via some of those contacts that they've mentioned. Similarly, if you're watching this on YouTube, because we're going to post this on YouTube as well, we'll put the links to GP Synergy there for you as well, so you can directly get in contact. A couple more questions there, Graham. You mentioned that some people actually pursue both fellowships, the FACRM and the FRA CGP. Are there any advantages to doing that?
It comes to a personal choice and what your interests are. Some registrars who choose to do both college training programs, it is a much bigger undertaking because you have to meet the training requirements for both training programs. But often we find the registrars who are motivated to do both college training have a personal drive and desire to achieve something above and beyond the minimum requirements. And more often than not, they're interested to extend themselves, but also avail themselves to the full breadth of the training opportunities that both college programs offer. And they may have a specific career goal in mind. They may have a destination or a mix of clinical practice that they're working towards, and they feel for their own personal circumstances that a comprehensive training program with
Graham, so I think you were just saying that some people like to do both because they get a bit more out of it and might fit specific career goals. Is that right?
Yeah, so registrars who explore the option of training towards both fellowships often do so because they want to extend themselves, they like a challenge, but often they've taken into consideration the specific career goals that they're wanting to achieve and feel that doing both fellowship programs helps equip them with the skills necessary for the type of general practice work they're hoping to engage in once they're working in the community.
I was just asking you the question about the FACRM. That is quite a portable fellowship, isn't it? You can work as a GP with that anywhere. It doesn't restrict you to working in a rural location.
That's right. So fellowship of either ACRM or RACGP leads to vocational registration and recognition as an independent GP anywhere in Australia. ACRM training, though, needs to be completed in a rural setting, but fellowship of either college means you're able to work as an independent GP anywhere in Australia. That's right.
And then we often have a few questions about the moratorium, the 19AB, or what's often called the 10-year moratorium. And look, there's a lot of things that are complex about the Australian medical system from a doctor from another country's perspective. But I often get questions about, well, when does it start and when does it finish? As a general rule of thumb, it starts the moment that you get your first registration, doesn't it?
That's right. And as a general rule of thumb, it starts from when you get your first registration, whether it's provisional or general. My advice would be, if you're not sure about when your moratorium applies to you, is to email the Department of Health to double check your specific circumstances. And perhaps, Anthony, you can double check the contact details, but off the top of my head, I think it's 19AB at health.gov.au email address.
Yeah, on their website, they've got a contact us, that's correct. And so you can actually run out a bit of your time as a trainee, and that's the point. So that the only time when it becomes a restriction is about where you can work as a specialist, which in the case of general practice is using the now the new classification of distribution priority areas, I could say. But a lot of people kind of perceive that as, well, it only kicks in when I'm a specialist, but actually it starts when you're training generally. So you will probably have served off a bit of time by the time you get to the end of your training and get your specialist qualification. So that's important to know. The other thing was, you know, most IMG doctors will have to go down through the rural pathway. What specific supports are available for rural registrars through groups like GP Synergy?
Yes, and I just want to say, you know, first up is we do recognise that, you know, particularly for international medical graduates or other doctors who only have the choice of choosing rural general practice training, this can be a difficult decision to make, particularly, you know, if you've got, you know, family commitments or other things in life that make, you know, relocating to a rural region challenging. And we do recognise that, you know, many GP registrars do make significant sacrifices, you know, in the pursuit and advancement of their own medical careers. One of the things we do at GP Synergy is try to provide as much support and as possible to our rural registrars. And the support comes in a number of different forms. Some of it is the program support that we provide, and that includes dedicated team members that help registrars relocate to rural regions. We have rural support officers that support our registrars undertaking rural training. All of our registrars are assigned a GP medical educator in their sub-region to guide them through their training. And for our rural registrars, these are usually GPs also working in rural settings themselves. So you are getting mentoring and advice from someone who is also in a rural region. We can't underestimate the support that the actual training practices provide and the whole practice training team. GP Synergy supports our supervisors and practice staff through a professional development program, and that in turn is to help equip them to support registrars who are working in a rural setting. Apart from the program support, we also offer financial assistance as well. So things like relocation allowances, and also for registrars who are working in rural regions, we also offer financial subsidies for education activities. So in addition to the comprehensive education program we already offer all our registrars, currently registrars working in the rural region have access to apply for funding to attend additional courses, for example, like emergency skills courses. And the other thing we also offer at GP Synergy for our registrars is a peer mentoring program as well. So, we do recognise, rural training can be challenging for some registrars. As exciting and it is, and the great medicine that rural medicine and general practice provides, but we do try to offer a wide range of supports for registrars who are training in rural regions.
Great. And do you have to be a rural generalist if you go down this pathway? Do you have to work in a hospital?
You don't have to be a rural generalist, and rural generalism, a bit of a tongue twister. Rural generalism, is a specific skill set that some GPs choose to develop in addition to the comprehensive primary care that GPs do provide. So rural generalism is not mandatory if you're working or training in rural general practice. We strongly encourage registrars to consider it because, as a rural GP, you can really, expand your skill set and add more value to the communities where you're working. And rural generalism doesn't just have to be, procedural things like ONG and anesthetics. It can be things like, mental health, Aboriginal health, and other disciplines as well. So yeah, rural generalism is not mandatory for rural GPs. In terms of working in a rural hospital, we do encourage all registrars to participate in the full breadth of general practice. And as a rural GP, like I mentioned a little bit in my presentation, one of the benefits of rural general practice is you'll get a bigger opportunity to participate in the full breadth of general practice services. Not just working in a medical clinic, but also doing the out of practice activities like home visits, nursing homes, and also in many rural settings, GPs are also working as GP visiting medical officers in the local hospitals. So GPs might be the VMO for the emergency department at your small, rural or remote country hospital. And as a GP registrar, we do encourage our registrars to participate in the full breadth of general practice, and that includes local hospital work, if that is what your GP supervisor also participates in.
Great. And then some doctors do have partners doing jobs or having family, etc., often in metropolitan urgent areas. Are there any options for doctors doing rural general practice to sort of accommodate family needs and those sort of things?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, that is one of the challenges and barriers for some people in considering rural medicine and not just, I guess, general practice. Whether or not you're only eligible for the rural pathway for the AGPT does depend on your own specific circumstances. And that is a difficult decision to make about relocating to a rural area, particularly if your partner has, career or other commitments in an urban setting. My advice around that is to plan ahead. And I don't say this lightly or to diminish the significance of the potential that you might be apart from family. But I guess, one of the things that might attract someone to general practice is the length of training. Comparatively, compared to other training programs, it is a fairly short training program. And depending on the options you choose, the time you have to spend in a rural setting could be as little as 18 months, depending on the options you are considering. So it's still a significant amount of time, but it's not like 4, 5, 6 years compared to other training programs. So you do need to weigh up your family and care responsibilities, make some plans ahead of time as to the timing of when it might be suitable for you to consider rural GP training, and be reassured that as a training organisation, we do realise these are significant impacts on our registrars, and that's why we do have a wide range of supports for our rural registrars who might be away from family and things like that.
Right.
Part of our rural support program also includes, for example, a subsidy for registrars, for example, to get a return flight ticket, back to their place of origin, so to speak. So there are little things like that that we try to minimize the impact without being able to completely take it away.
Right. And finally, what's your top tip if someone's thinking of applying for GP training?
My top tip would be to ask lots of questions and be prepared. And I think you said in your introduction, with general practice training, sometimes it can appear quite confusing as to all the different options and pathways and different programs that are available. And everybody has their own individual circumstances. Everybody has their own different career goals they're hoping to achieve. And for general practice training, one thing I find is sometimes people thinking about general practice don't know quite where to turn to for advice about what the next steps might be. And the good news of that is we're here to support you. If you have any questions about your specific circumstances and what pathway might be suitable for you, or whether XYZ could be a possibility, come and have a chat to us, and we'll be able to give you further advice about specific things to prepare for. If you're thinking of applying to GP training, so yeah, contact GP Synergy. We do have a rural mentor program as well. So if you'd like to be linked up with a rural GP mentor as well, that is something we could try to arrange for you. But otherwise, please speak to us. We'd love to have a chat to you about your individual circumstances and give you some personal advice about what may or may not be possible.